Pig and Shooter here. I have a new subject I wanted to bring up, and that is one of trigger control. There's several different benefits of having proper trigger control, and I want to kind of go over a little bit of how it works and what it is, and how to train yourself for it, as well as the benefits of it. The first thing is I have safety checked all of these weapons. They are completely empty. So this one is a rimfire, and I will be pulling the trigger. However, it does have a hammer block safety, so it will not damage the firing pin. Just so everybody knows in advance, I'm not damaging my guns. So, what is trigger control? Trigger control is several different things, actually. It's where your finger is on your, or where the trigger meets your finger, and how you pull or squeeze the trigger, some people. It's how far you release it after you've fired your weapon. It's how steady you pull or squeeze the trigger. Some people say you have to squeeze the trigger. Some people say you pull the trigger. You know, in my opinion, it's however you do it the most smooth way and the most consistent way. That's really what trigger control is being consistent. Some people believe you never release that trigger after you fire because you can have a double fire. Well, with some weapons like the 1911, the trigger pull is so short. Yes, that's a possibility. But if you're consistent with how you pull the trigger and how you hold your finger and how you do the things, you're usually prepared for it. Now, new shooters, I would definitely agree. Once you pull the trigger, you hold the trigger back. Once you're ready to fire again, you release the trigger slightly and then pull it back. That would be proper trigger control, especially for a new shooter. Where that would come into play would not be in something that's single action like this, where you have to cock the hammer back, but something like a pistol, like an automatic. Revolvers are pretty simple the way they work. Once again, totally empty. Revolvers are pretty simple the way they work. If you look, you cock the hammer back, and you notice how the trigger sets. Once you pull the trigger, the hammer falls forward, and you can pull the trigger several times, and nothing happens. That's pretty much the way a single action revolver will work. If you pull the trigger after it's gone off, nothing's going to happen in this revolver. Now, a double action revolver, if you have it in single action and you pull the trigger and the hammer falls, then you release the trigger, then you can pull it. It's got a much harder, longer pull. It will go off. So know your firearm first off. Now, you'll notice when I had my finger in, it didn't show you where I had it. If you look, my finger sits. I try to keep the center of my finger, the pad of my finger, right centered on the trigger. There's a reason for that. That is another part of trigger control. What happens is, if you put too much finger on there, you have a tendency to push the firearm and your shots will go off to the left. If you have too little finger on there, you have a tendency to pull your firearm to the right, which will end up making your shots go off to the right. Proper finger control is having a good grip, or trigger control is having a good grip on your weapon, and like I said, this gun is empty. Don't worry, don't, safety Nazis, leave me alone. Having a good firm grip on your gun, putting your finger properly, and I'm going to try, I don't know if you'll see that in there. It's hard to see. You put your finger so that first knuckle right there and the tip of your finger, you're in the exact center. So, and that is what rests on your trigger. So when you pull or squeeze your trigger, whatever terminology you want to use, it needs to be consistent and it needs to be smooth. When you pull the trigger, it doesn't slide the gun either way. It is straightforward, it is aimed, and when you're pulling on the trigger, it doesn't pull it either way. Same thing for a mini pistol, just like this one. It is cocked now. You put your finger in, even though there's a very short distance between here. There's a very short distance between the back and the trigger. My hand is really big on this. I will stick my finger out farther out the trigger guard to get a proper grip on it and to hold the trigger properly, other than cramming my finger all the way in. It's a lot less comfortable, and these guns are usually not for just going to the range and popping off 100 rounds. This is, you're going to go to the range, you're going to shoot it, so you have a feel for it, you have memory muscle for that weapon, but you're not going to go and pop off a whole bunch of rounds for it. You're going to really just shoot what you need to train with. But you have to train with your trigger control. And once again, you can see my finger is about halfway between the tip and the pad, and it's going to be a consistent pull to the back until it breaks. And that's when it fires. Now, most instructors will tell you, once it fires, you hold the trigger back. You want to hold the trigger back, and once it fires, then it'll reset. It will cock the gun again, and when you're ready to fire again, or after that has fired, you'll release till you feel and hear a click. On this gun, you have to release all the way out and then bring it back in for it to fire again. It does not have the low reset. On something like the PT-111, it is now cocked. It is a single double action revolver. What happens with this is, if you aim, once again, finger center of the pad on the finger, you have your finger on the trigger, you get it to the back, you pull consistently till it breaks, holding the trigger back. It pushes back, it cocks the gun again, and then you slowly get to the release. You hear that click, you're ready to pull the trigger again. And then you can pull the trigger again. Trigger control is knowing where that release is. There it is, and I can pull the trigger again with very minimum pull. That's for follow-up shots. Double action pull on this gun would be a long pull. Notice I still have the finger in the same spot. Finger is still in the same spot on the pad. And it's a long, consistent pull till it breaks. And then release. Similar with the Smith & Wesson, it's going to be the same as the PT-111 and other guns of this type. You would have the gun cocked, ready to go. The trigger pulls to the back, and it gets to the point where there's no more take-up. Take-up is the space of on the trigger where you pull it back to where it gets difficult to pull back. That's your take-up. And then at that point, you pull a consistent pull until it breaks. Break would be when the release of the firing pin happens. When the gun cocks again, you would release out, and then you were able to pull the trigger again. You're not releasing all the way, you're just pulling it till you feel the click. 1911s are going to be a little bbit different. 1911s are a single action semi-automatic pistol. The Phoenix Arms HP-22 is the same, is very similar to this. When the hammer is cocked back, the trigger is set and ready to go. So the hammer is cocked back, the trigger is set and ready to go. The trigger on a 1911 is very shallow pull. When it fires, the trigger or the hammer locks back, and then you have a very short reset, and then you're able to pull the trigger again. The 1911 trigger moves maybe 1/8 of an inch, and there are some that will move even less. So trigger control on a 1911 is very important. You want to make sure you hold that trigger and don't release until you're ready to fire again. 1911s are the exception to my rule on it's okay to let go. Because the trigger pull on 1911s are so light and they are so short, you want to make sure you hold that back. Otherwise, it is very possible to get a double shot. So that's my take on trigger control. I believe that having proper trigger control leads to better range time, leads to better aim, also leads to a it's generally from practice, from training, from knowing your gun and how it functions, how it works, where the break point is, and how you need to hold your hand to make sure you keep that finger properly on the trigger or hold the trigger in the proper location, knowing where that break point is. That's trigger control in my mind. What do you think? Go ahead and like, subscribe, share, comment on this. Let me know what you think about this. How do you practice to get the trigger control down right? In my opinion, it's mostly range time that'll get you there. Go ahead and give me your opinion. Anyway, this is Pagan Shooter. Till next time.